Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
It's great to be here.
We have a really packed deep dive for you today. We're looking at 11 distinct sources, and we're going to tackle them section by section, just as you'd find them in the paper.
That's right. We'll start with the editorial section, then move through the opinion pieces, check in on the latest in science, explore text and context, and then we'll wrap it all up with the business section.
It's a seriously wide spectrum. I was looking through it earlier, and we're going to cover everything from the philosophy of copyright law.
All the way to the very specific chemistry of Venezuelan crude oil. It's quite a journey.
It really is. So let's not waste any time. Let's dive straight into the editorial section. Article 1 tackles a subject that, on the surface, might sound a bit dry: copyright reform.
Right, but the author does something brilliant here. They anchor it in a story that is just, well, it's immediately infuriating.
I agree. It starts with the personal story of Nirmita. Tell us about her.
Nirmita was a former colleague of the author, and she's visually impaired. She found herself in this completely absurd situation. She wanted to buy a book from the United States.
Okay.
And this book was formatted in something called DAISY, which is the Digital Accessible Information System.
Okay.
It's basically the gold standard for accessibility.
So she had the money, she had the need, she knew exactly what she wanted, but she couldn't get it.
That's the infuriating part. Correct. A sighted person could go online, buy the print edition or the ebook, and have it instantly. No problem.
But not for the accessible version.
No. Because of territorial copyright laws, these really specific rules restricting the cross-border exchange of that particular format, Nirmita was completely locked out.
So the very law that's meant to protect the creator was actually preventing a legitimate sale and blocking access to knowledge for someone with a disability.
It's a perfect example of a regulation completely losing sight of its purpose. Now, the source does mention that this specific issue was eventually fixed.
Right, through the Marrakesh Treaty.
Yes, exactly. But the author uses this whole episode to make a much, much bigger point about what they call copyright maximalism.
And it seems like a hard-won battle, too. The copyright industry, as the article puts it, fought that treaty.
They fought it tooth and nail. Publishers, rights holders, they're terrified of losing even an inch of control. And the author contrasts this modern attitude with the very origins of copyright.
Let's go back to that. The Statute of Anne.
Yeah, way back in 1710, it gave a monopoly for just 14 years, a decade and a half, and then the work entered the public domain.
And today, what are we looking at under something like India's 1957 Act?
It's just exploded. Now it's the author's entire lifetime, plus another 60 or 70 years after they've died. And here's the kicker. It's automatic. You don't even have to register it.
So wait, you're saying every doodle I make, every silly email I write, every random caption on an Instagram post is legally locked up for potentially a century or more?
Theoretically, yes. And this is where the whole system just slams right into the modern reality of artificial intelligence.
Because AI models need data. They need to read or crawl the web to learn patterns.
Exactly. But under this strict maximalist copyright view, that crawling is technically mass infringement. You're making copies of data to process it.
It seems like an impossible situation.
Yeah.
You can't build the technology of the future if the legal framework is stuck in the past.
It's a huge hurdle. The source cites a really interesting study by Laurenesia. They looked at 7 Asian countries. In 4 of them, the legal framework is so restrictive that training an AI is effectively illegal.
Wow. That puts those countries at a massive, massive disadvantage compared to, say, the US or Europe.
It absolutely does. And the author points out that other places are already moving on this. Japan, Singapore, the EU, they've all pivoted. They introduced specific exceptions for what's called text and data mining.
And what's the logic there?
The logic is simple, really. They recognize that a machine analyzing text for statistical patterns is just not the same thing as a human sitting down to enjoy a novel. One is mechanistic use, the other is enjoying the creative expression.
So the big takeaway here is that India needs to get flexible. It needs a kind of fair use exception for the algorithm age, or it risks getting left behind.
Precisely. If India wants to be a tech superpower, the argument goes, it needs to stop viewing this kind of data mining as theft and start seeing it as an essential mechanistic process for innovation.
Okay, let's stay in the editorial section. Article 2 shifts the focus a bit, but stays with AI. It looks at the social impact, specifically in the context of the upcoming India AI Impact Summit.
Right, and this piece is really trying to bridge the gap between 2 very loud, very different camps on AI. You've got the super optimists on one side.
The ones who only see productivity gains and GDP growth.
Yes. And then on the other side, you have the skeptics who are, frankly, terrified of mass unemployment and rising inequality.
And the numbers the article throws out are staggering on both sides of that argument. It projects that by 2030, AI could generate 3 million new tech jobs in India.
It could, but, and this is a huge but, it will also reshape 10 million existing jobs. And we all know that reshape can be a very polite way of saying, you need to learn a completely new workflow or you might become obsolete.
That's the fear.
It is. However, the International Labor Organization, the ILO, offers a more nuanced view, which the article highlights. They argue that technology itself doesn't determine the outcome, governance does. How we manage the transition is everything.
They also make an interesting point that the global south might be slightly buffered from this initial shock. How does that work?
It's an interesting point about the structure of the economy. In high-income countries, maybe a third of all jobs are clerical, knowledge-based work.
The exact kind of white-collar work that generative AI is really good at?
Precisely. In low-income countries, that exposure is much lower, something like only 11.5%. There's simply more manual, physical labor that AI, for now, can't really touch.
But the article is clear that India isn't just sitting back and waiting for this wave to hit. It highlights how AI is already being used to help the informal sector. Tell me about the eShram platform.
This is a fascinating and massive tech for good case study. eShram is essentially a national database for informal workers. Think street vendors, construction laborers, gig workers.
People who are normally outside the formal system.
Exactly. And it has registered 315 million people. It's a staggering number. The source notes that because of digital infrastructure like this, social protection coverage in India has jumped from just 19% in 2015 to a projected 64% in 2025.
And now big tech is getting involved. I see Microsoft is mentioned.
Yes, they've committed $17.5 billion to integrate AI into this platform. The goal is to use AI for what's called job matching at a scale that humans just can't manage.
Give me an example of what that looks like.
Well, imagine an AI that can instantly analyze a migrant worker's skill set, see that they have experience in masonry, and connect them with a housing project in another city that's facing a labor shortage. It's about optimizing the entire informal labor market.
So the government's big bet is on augmentation, not replacement, using AI to make the existing workforce more efficient and connected.
That seems to be the strategy. The union budget even announced a new high-powered education to employment and enterprise standing committee. It's a bit of a mouthful.
It is.
But the name signals that they understand the skill gap is the single biggest risk here, and they're trying to build a bridge before the workforce, falls off the cliff.
Okay, let's move on to the opinion section.
Yeah.
Article 3 takes a much darker turn. We're now looking at the military application of AI.
This is where things get really complicated. It's a serious global stalemate. The article focuses on the REAIM summit that's responsible AI in the military domain.
And the big headline from that summit is that India abstained from signing the Pathways to Action pledge.
They did. And they were not alone. The U.S. and China also refused to sign.
Which is significant.
It's huge. When the three biggest military and tech powers all say no thanks, you know the issue is deep-seated. And the core problem is what the article calls the dual-use dilemma.
Explain that.
It means the same AI code can have parallel civilian and military tracks. The algorithm that optimizes Amazon's delivery routes could, with a few tweaks, optimize a swarm of attack drones. It's very, very hard to restrict military R&D without also crippling your civilian tech sector.
And tangled up in all of this is the debate over laws, lethal autonomous weapons systems.
Ooh, yes, the killer robots debate. And it's basically stuck in a definitional deadlock. No one can agree on what autonomous actually means.
Why not?
Because the tech-advanced nations want a very high threshold for that definition. They want it to be very loose to maintain their freedom of action. They don't want their existing smart missiles or defense systems to be accidentally banned by a new treaty.
So what was India's specific reason for abstaining?
The official line, as the article presents it, is that binding treaties are premature. The argument is a pragmatic one, really. We live in a dangerous neighborhood, we have active border disputes, we cannot afford to tie our hands with a treaty if our adversaries, who might not be as transparent, don't also sign on.
So it's a security calculation. Does the article offer any way out of this impasse?
It does suggest a few starting points. It floats the idea of creating a risk hierarchy. So instead of trying for one big, all-encompassing ban, you categorize the risks.
For example.
For example, completely banning AI from making the final decision in nuclear launch systems. That seems like a pretty reasonable no-brainer that almost everyone should be able to agree on.
Don't let the chatbot launch the nukes. That seems like a very sensible baseline.
You'd hope so.
Okay, moving to Article 4, still in the opinion section. This one looks at India's broader strategy for governing AI. The source calls it the third way.
And this is really about geopolitical positioning. The author lays out the three dominant global models for AI governance. You have the EU model,
Which is very regulation first, very compliance heavy. GDPR is the classic example.
exactly. Then you have the US model, which is much more market-driven, very hands-off, let innovation flourish. And finally, you have the China model, which is centralized state control.
And India is trying to carve out a path right down the middle of all that.
That's the argument. The third way focuses less on just restriction and more on adoption and diffusion. The priority isn't just to put up guardrails, but to actively get AI into crucial sectors like healthcare and agriculture.
But they are putting up guardrails.
Yeah.
The article highlights the February 10th amendments to the IT rules.
They are, and those rules are quite specific. They do two big things. First, mandatory labeling of AI-generated content.
So you know if that video you're watching is a deepfake.
Right. And second, a really strict 3-hour window for social media platforms to take down harmful AI-generated content once it's flagged. It shifts the burden of safety squarely onto the platforms.
The article brings up the Global South perspective again here, which is interesting.
It does. There's a real fear of what some are calling digital colonialism. If every developing nation becomes completely reliant on proprietary AI systems built in the West, it just creates a new form of dependency.
So what's the alternative?
India is trying to position itself as a kind of hub for middle powers to coordinate on things like safety evaluations and standards. The idea is to create a coalition so they aren't just passive consumers of Western tech, but active participants in shaping it.
Right, staying in opinion for our fifth article. This one is quite different. It's less about policy and much more about the human mind. The title is The Crisis of Thought in the Age of AI.
This is a deeply philosophical, almost mournful piece. The author is really concerned about the loss of what they call thinking on paper.
What do they mean by that?
They're talking about the process of traditional education, writing a long essay, wrestling with a thesis, organizing your thoughts. That cognitive struggle wasn't just about producing a document at the end. The struggle was the learning.
The article calls what we do now cognitive outsourcing.
Exactly. We're outsourcing the hard work of thinking to a machine. The author shares this wonderful personal anecdote about hunting for a specific Evelyn Waugh article in a physical library.
I loved that part.
The smell of the old paper, the wrong turns down dusty aisles, the serendipitous discovery of another book next to the one you were looking for. He argues that access to information is not the same as engagement with it. Digital retrieval is instant, yes, but it can be hollow. There's no journey.
And this isn't just a philosophical point. The article warns this is polluting the world of science.
Yes, phantom citations. We're seeing this flood of scientific papers being submitted to journals that are at least partially AI-generated, and these papers often cite studies that sound real but don't actually exist.
The AI just makes them up?
It fabricates them based on patterns. But if other researchers, or worse, other AI models, then train on that fake data, you get this terrifying feedback loop of error. We start to pollute the very foundation of the scientific record.
The author also takes a very strong stance on the word hallucination, doesn't he?
Oh, he hates it. He argues that calling an AI's errors hallucinations is a dangerous way of anthropomorphizing the machine. It makes it seem human-like.
What's the distinction he draws?
He says that human metaphor, our imagination, it comes from lived experience, from pain, joy, memory. And AI fabrication is just probability. It's a mathematical prediction that went wrong. He warns that if we lose that distinction, we face the death of language, and that leaves the electorate completely disarmed against sophisticated propaganda.
That is a very heavy thought. Let's shift gears dramatically and move to the science section for Article 6. We're going from the philosophy of the mind to the actual soil of Kashmir.
This is a fantastic pivot. It really shows how technology of a very different kind applies right down to the ground. We're talking about the Kashmir apple industry, which the article says supports 27 lakh people. It's huge.
But they have a structural problem, right?
Yeah.
Their trees are essentially ancient technology.
That's a great way to put it. The traditional trees are seedling-based. They grow into these massive tall trees that take 6 to 8 years just to produce a single fruit.
6 to 8 years is a long time to wait for a return on your investment.
It is. And even then, the yield is low, about 10 to 12 tons per hectare. Plus, they're incredibly labor intensive. You need these huge, precarious ladders to harvest them. It's inefficient and dangerous.
So what is the scientific solution the article proposes?
It's all about high-density orchards. This involves using clonal rootstocks, and the article specifically mentions the M9 variety. These are essentially dwarf trees.
Dwarf trees.
Yes. They stay small and manageable, which means you can plant many, many more of them per acre. But the real magic is a quality called precocity.
Precocity.
It just means they mature early.
Hmm.
These new trees start fruiting in just 2 to 4 years. And the yield jumps from that old 10 tons to as much as 40 tons per hectare.
That is a four-fold increase. A massive difference.
It's a complete game changer. The source quotes a farmer, a man named Tantre Manzoor, who made the switch to M9 rootstock. His wait time dropped from a decade to just 2 years, and he's now getting premium prices for the Gala variety he grows.
Is there a climate change angle to this as well?
There is, and it's a crucial one. Kashmir is warming. The winters are becoming more erratic, and they're getting fewer of the chill hours that apple trees need. These dwarf fruit stocks are proving to be much better at coping with heat stress and require less water, especially if they're managed with modern drip irrigation.
So it's not just about profit. It's about building resilience. It's about the very survival of the crop in a changing climate.
That's the bigger picture, absolutely.
All right, let's move on to the text and context section. Article 7 brings us back to law and governance. It discusses a proposed reform of judicial appointments in India.
This piece stems from a private member bill introduced by P. Wilson in the Rajya Sabha, and it really shines a spotlight on a glaring data point about who actually gets to become a judge in India's higher courts.
The diversity statistics mentioned are, well, they're quite shocking.
They really are. The article states that between 2018 and 2024, only 20% of high judiciary appointees were from SC, ST, or OBC communities.
And for women and minorities.
Even lower. Women made up less than 15%, and religious minorities less than 5%. The proposal in the bill is to mandate representation in proportion to the national population.
The bill also tackles the issue of access, right? Because as it stands, the Supreme Court only sits in Delhi.
Exactly. Think about it. If you're a litigant in Chennai or Mumbai, the cost and time involved in dragging a case all the way to Delhi can be prohibitive. It makes justice inaccessible.
So what's the proposed fix?
The bill proposes setting up regional benches of the Supreme Court in Kolkata, Mumbai, and Chennai. The idea is this would help clear the enormous backlog of cases, which was apparently at 90,000 as of January 2026.
Now, the article also dives into a critique of the collegium system for appointing judges.
It does. For context, the collegium, which is basically a system where judges appoint other judges, was invented by the Supreme Court itself in a series of judgments.
The idea being to insulate the judiciary from political interference.
That was the idea. But the critics who are quoted in this article argue it has become opaque. It's led to accusations of a kith and kin network, the so-called uncle judge syndrome, where relatives of sitting judges get appointed.
So what's the alternative being discussed?
The author suggests reviving a version of the NJC, the National Judicial Appointments Commission, which was an attempt to reform the system that was struck down. But they suggest a new version with much broader representation, bringing in people from the bar and from academia to increase transparency.
Okay, Article 8, still in text and context, takes us back to energy, specifically the complex risks of buying Venezuelan crude oil.
This is a perfect lesson in how chemistry meets geopolitics. You might think oil is just oil, but it's not. The article explains that Venezuelan crude is bottom-heavy.
What does that mean in practical terms?
It means it's incredibly viscous, it's thick, almost like tar. It's really hard to pump through standard pipelines. It's also highly acidic and full of contaminants like metals. You can't just pour this stuff into a standard Indian refinery. It will literally corrode the equipment from the inside out.
So if it's that difficult to handle, why is India even considering buying it?
One word: price. It's cheap. Indian refiners could potentially get a discount of $10 to $12 per barrel compared to other sources.
And what does that translate to for the country?
The article estimates it could save India about $3 billion a year on its import bill. A huge amount of money.
But the refiners are hesitant.
They're very hesitant because of what the article basically calls the Trump risk, but it's really about political volatility. The relationship between the U.S. and Venezuela is so unstable that sanctions could snap back into place at any moment.
And that would be a problem because
Because to process this difficult crude, you need very specific chemical catalysts. Refineries buy those catalysts in massive quantities, thousands of tons at a time. If you spend millions on the right catalysts, and then sanctions hit, and the oil supply is cut off, you're stuck with a useless supply chain. It's a very high-stakes gamble.
Our ninth article is the last one in the text and context section, and I have to say, it's a personal favorite. It's about the art and grit of skiing.
This piece is just beautifully written. It's built around this powerful and frankly terrifying central metaphor, leaning into the abyss.
It's all about counterintuitive physics, isn't it?
Completely. When you're standing at the top of a steep, icy slope, every instinct in your brain is screaming at you to lean back, lean uphill towards safety.
But that's the worst thing you can do.
It's the worst thing. If you lean back, you take all the pressure off the edges of your skis, you lose your grip, and you crash. To maintain control, you have to do the opposite of what your brain wants. You have to lean downhill into the void.
And that's what engages the outside ski, which the article talks about.
That's right. The outside ski in a turn bears 70 to 80% of your weight. The hourglass shape of a modern ski, the side cut, it only works. It only cars into the snow if you pressure it by leaning forward.
The article connects this feeling to the 2026 Olympics, mentioning Lindsey Vonn's comeback at 41.
It does. It quotes her urging people to dare greatly. It also mentions Bode Miller,
The legend.
the absolute legend. The article recalls his incredible 2005 run where he lost ski halfway down the course and just kept going at 80 kilometers an hour on one leg. It's just this pure testament to human grit and balance. The author's final point is that learning to ski reframes winter from something you have to endure to something you can actually anticipate.
A great perspective. Finally, we arrive at the business section. Article 10 looks at a big split in the EU's trade dilemma. It's made in versus made with.
This is a really interesting internal conflict within the European Union. They're trying to figure out how to save their key industries from what they see as unfair Chinese competition.
And there are two opposing camps.
Exactly. On one side, you have France, led by Macron. They are pushing for a strict made-in-Europe policy. Very clear rules. If you want public money or subsidies, you must manufacture your products here.
And who is on the other side of that argument?
On the other side, you have countries like Germany, Sweden, the Netherlands. They are advocating for a more flexible, made-with-Europe approach.
What's their argument?
Their argument, which is backed up by companies like Honda, is that modern supply chains are completely global. Even a European car is full of components from all over the world. They say you simply cannot make every single battery component or microchip efficiently in Europe. If you try to force it, you just make European products too expensive to compete on the world stage.
So where is this likely to land? What's the compromise?
The article suggests it will likely be a limited compromise. They'll probably target a few highly strategic sectors like wind turbines, solar panels, and batteries, where they enforce strict made-in-Europe rules. But for everything else, they'll allow for reciprocal commitments with trusted partners. It's a kind of guarded openness.
And our final source for today, Article 11. It's about the global ascent of sports data analytics.
This industry has just exploded. It's gone so far beyond the old Moneyball statistics. The market is predicted to reach $7.5 billion by 2032. We're talking about a level of biometric surveillance that was science fiction a decade ago.
What kind of tech are we actually seeing on the field?
We're seeing players wear vests with GPS and biometric sensors that track their heart rate, their breathing, their speed, all in real time. But it's also about computer vision.
Cameras tracking everything.
Everything. Cameras that capture 50 images per second to track the skeletal movement of players who don't even have the ball, just to analyze their positioning and fatigue.
And the article says a lot of the money driving this is coming from the betting markets.
That's a huge driver. The betting industry needs this incredibly granular data for what are called prop bets, bets on individual player performance. The article mentions a deal where Genius Sports bought a data company called Legend for $1.2 billion. That single deal shows you exactly where the value lies.
But this must have huge privacy concerns.
Massive ones. In the EU, it runs right up against GDPR regulations. But the article notes a key fact. Most professional athletes sign away their data rights as part of their employment contracts.
So they are effectively trading their personal biological privacy for a performance edge and a paycheck.
That's the deal. It's the ultimate commodification of the self. Your body's data becomes an asset for your team and for the betting industry.
Wow. From copywriting human creativity at the start to harvesting human biometric data at the end. We really did cover the full spectrum of the information age today.
We certainly did. And it's amazing how it all connects, whether it's the law, the technology, or the physical limits of the human body.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.